April 5, 1933, a date that lives in financial infamy. On that morning, ordinary Americans woke up to discover that owning gold, real money that had existed for 5,000 years, had become a federal crime overnight. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, and with the stroke of a pen, the government declared war on private wealth. They gave citizens until May 1st to turn in their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve. The penalty for refusal? A $10,000 fine equivalent to $230,000 today, and up to 10 years in federal prison. But here's what keeps me up at night. What happened in 1933 wasn't a one-time emergency measure. It was a playbook. And right now, in 2025, as I'm recording this, every single condition that led to Executive Order 6102 is not just present, it's amplified. The government debt is higher. The currency crisis is deeper. The public's loss of faith in the system is accelerating. And the tools they need to confiscate your wealth are already in place, waiting to be activated. I know what you're thinking. That could never happen again. We live in a different world. There are laws against that. And you're right to be skeptical. I would be too. But before you dismiss this, let me show you something that will make your blood run cold. In the last 18 months, 3 separate federal agencies have quietly updated their emergency protocols regarding precious metals. The IRS has expanded its reporting requirements for gold transactions. The Treasury Department has been running simulation exercises for currency crises. And perhaps most disturbing, several state governments have already passed legislation allowing them to seize assets during declared emergencies. The infrastructure for confiscation already exists. The legal precedent was set in 1933 and has never been overturned. The only question is timing. And based on every data point I'm about to show you, that timing is 2026. Not 2030. Not someday in the distant future. 2026. And if your wealth is sitting in gold right now, or if you're thinking about buying gold as protection against what's coming, you need to understand exactly what happened in 1933, why it's about to happen again, and what you absolutely must do before the window closes. To understand why gold confiscation is coming again, you have to understand why they did it the first time. And it wasn't what you think. It wasn't about hoarding. It wasn't about fairness. It was about one thing: monetary control. Let me break down the 3 pillars that made confiscation inevitable in 1933, and then I'll show you why all 3 are back with a vengeance today. In 1933, the United States was drowning in debt from World War I and the early years of the Great Depression. The federal government had spent far beyond its means, and the bill was coming due. But here was the problem: the dollar was backed by gold. Every dollar in circulation could theoretically be redeemed for physical gold at a fixed rate of $20.67 per ounce. This gold standard meant the government couldn't just print unlimited money. They were constrained by how much gold sat in the Treasury vaults. When Franklin Roosevelt took office in March 1933, the Treasury was hemorrhaging gold. Foreign governments and wealthy Americans were converting their dollars into gold and pulling it out of the system. Why? Because they didn't trust the government's ability to repay its debts. They wanted real money, not paper promises. At the rate gold was leaving, the Treasury would be empty within months. The entire monetary system was on the verge of collapse. Roosevelt faced an impossible choice. He could slash government spending by 50% or more to balance the budget, politically suicidal during a depression. He could default on the debt, destroying America's credit rating forever. Or he could change the rules of the game. He chose option 3. Executive Order 6102 accomplished 2 things simultaneously. First, it forced Americans to hand over their gold to the government at the old rate of $20.67 per ounce. Second, once the government had confiscated the gold, Roosevelt immediately revalued it to $35 per ounce through the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Think about what that means. The government forced you to sell your gold for $20.67, then instantly declared that same gold was worth $35. That's a 69% wealth transfer from citizens to the government in a single move. This devaluation effectively gave the government a massive injection of capital, stolen purchasing power that allowed them to print money, fund New Deal programs, and inflate their way out of the debt crisis. They couldn't do this with gold in private hands. They needed to monopolize it first. The United States government has $34.8 trillion in official debt. That number is so large it's become meaningless to most people, so let me put it in perspective. The interest payments alone on that debt now exceed $1.1 trillion per year. That's more than the entire defense budget. That's more than we spend on Medicare. We are paying more in interest than we spend on the actual functioning of the government. And it's accelerating. In 2020, the debt was $27 trillion. In 5 years, we've added almost $8 trillion. $1.6 trillion per year. At current rates, we'll hit $40 trillion by 2027. The Congressional Budget Office's own projections show the debt reaching $60 trillion by 2034. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are the government's own numbers. The Federal Reserve has tried to manage this with interest rate manipulation, but they're trapped. If they keep rates high to fight inflation, the interest payments on the debt will bankrupt the government. If they lower rates to make the debt payments manageable, inflation will spiral out of control and destroy the currency. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't. History shows there are only 3 ways out of this trap: austerity, default, or confiscation. Austerity means cutting Social Security, Medicare, defense spending, political suicide. Default means America loses its reserve currency status and the global financial system collapses. That leaves confiscation. And the asset they're going to confiscate is the one that has always been the escape hatch during currency crises: gold. In 1933, the American people had lost faith in the banking system. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 banks failed. Think about that number. 9,000 banks disappeared, taking millions of people's savings with them. There was no FDIC insurance back then. If your bank failed, your money was just gone. This created a psychological break. People stopped trusting paper money. They stopped trusting banks. They started converting everything they could into gold, real, tangible wealth that couldn't be printed away or erased by a bank failure. By early 1933, this gold hoarding had become so widespread that it threatened the entire monetary system. The velocity of money collapsed because people weren't spending dollars, they were hoarding gold. Roosevelt declared a national banking holiday, shutting down every bank in the country for 4 days. When they reopened, he had already laid the groundwork for Executive Order 6102. The government's logic was simple. If people won't use dollars, we'll force them to. If they're hoarding gold, we'll make it illegal. In 2023, we saw the second largest bank failure in American history when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. Within a week, Signature Bank and First Republic followed. $300 billion in deposits vanished or were frozen overnight. And just like in 1933, these failures revealed something terrifying. The fractional reserve banking system is a house of cards. SVB's collapse was caused by the exact same thing that's threatening hundreds of other banks right now: rising interest rates destroying the value of their bond holdings. Remember, banks bought massive amounts of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities when interest rates were near zero. When rates went up, the value of those bonds crashed. SVB was sitting on $17 billion in unrealized losses that became very realized the moment depositors started pulling their money out. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you. SVB wasn't an outlier. According to the FDIC's own data, American banks are currently sitting on over $620 billion in unrealized losses. $620 billion. That's money that's already gone. But the banks don't have to report it yet because of accounting tricks. When depositors figure this out and start demanding their money, we're going to see 1933 all over again. And the government knows it. This is why the Federal Reserve created the Bank Term Funding Program in March 2023, an emergency lending facility that essentially lets banks borrow money using their underwater bonds as collateral valued at par. It's a backdoor bailout, and the fact that they created it tells you they're expecting more bank failures. When the next wave hits, and it will hit in 2026 when the commercial real estate crisis peaks, people are going to do exactly what they did in 1933. They're going to rush to convert their paper wealth into hard assets. And the primary hard asset they'll run to is gold. The government cannot allow this. If everyone tries to buy gold simultaneously, the price will explode to $5,000, $10,000, maybe higher. That kind of price signal sends a message to the world. The dollar is dying. So just like in 1933, they'll make the escape hatch illegal before people can use it. Here's the thing most people don't understand about Executive Order 6102. Roosevelt didn't need Congress to approve it. He didn't need a constitutional amendment. He invoked emergency powers under the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, a World War I law that gave the president almost unlimited authority during national emergencies. The legal justification was simple. Private gold hoarding was preventing economic recovery. Therefore, it was an emergency that threatened national security. Therefore, the president had the authority to seize it. The courts upheld this logic. In the 1935 case Norman versus Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the Supreme Court ruled that the gold confiscation was constitutional because Congress had the power to regulate currency. That precedent has never been overturned. It's still on the books. The Trading with the Enemy Act has been amended and incorporated into the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, of 1977, which gives the president even broader authority. Under current law, the president can freeze assets, block transactions, and seize property during a declared national emergency. And here's the terrifying part. We're currently operating under 42 active national emergencies. 42. The emergency powers that were supposed to be rare and temporary have become permanent. In 2021, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, significantly expanded its authority over digital assets and precious metals transactions. They now have the legal framework to freeze and seize cryptocurrency and physical gold holdings if they're deemed a threat to national security or economic stability. In 2023, the IRS updated Form 8300, requiring anyone who receives more than $10,000 in cash, gold, or other precious metals to report the transaction within 15 days. They're building a database of who owns what and where it's stored. Multiple states, including California, New York, and Illinois, have updated their emergency power statutes to include provisions for asset seizure during economic emergencies. California's statute specifically mentions precious metals and other stores of value as assets that can be seized or restricted during declared emergencies. The infrastructure for confiscation is already built. The legal authority already exists. The database of who owns gold is being compiled right now through reporting requirements. They're not preparing for confiscation. They're preparing for the announcement. You might be asking, if all of this is true, why hasn't it happened already? Why 2026 specifically? Because confiscation doesn't happen in good times. It happens when the government has no other choice. It happens when multiple crises converge and the system is hours away from complete collapse. And right now, 3 major crisis points are all scheduled to hit in 2026. There is $2.9 trillion in commercial real estate debt in the United States. Of that, $1.5 trillion needs to be refinanced between now and the end of 2026. These loans were made when interest rates were 2 to 3%. Now they need to refinance at 7 to 8%. For most properties, this is mathematically impossible. Office buildings in major cities are sitting at 50 to 60% vacancy rates because of remote work. Retail spaces are being destroyed by e-commerce. Even multifamily properties are struggling because construction costs and property taxes have exploded while rent controls limit income growth. Property values have collapsed 30 to 50% in many markets, but the debt hasn't changed. This creates a wave of defaults that peaks in late 2025 and early 2026. Who holds this debt? Regional banks. The same regional banks that are already sitting on $620 billion in unrealized losses from their bond portfolios. When the commercial real estate defaults hit, these banks won't just be insolvent on paper, they'll be insolvent in reality. We're talking about potential failures of 50 to 100 regional banks in a 6-month period. When that happens, depositors will panic. Bank runs will begin. And the FDIC, which currently has about $125 billion in its insurance fund, will be completely overwhelmed. They won't be able to cover even 10% of the losses. The government will have to step in with emergency measures. And that's when Executive Order 6102 version 2.0 gets dusted off. The Treasury market is the foundation of the global financial system. It's supposed to be the most liquid, safest market in the world. But it's showing signs of severe stress. In late 2023 and early 2024, we saw multiple instances where Treasury auctions showed weak demand. Foreign buyers, especially China and Japan, have been net sellers of U.S. Treasuries for 3 consecutive years. Here's why this matters. The U.S. government needs to roll over approximately $9 trillion in maturing debt in 2026, plus fund another $2 trillion in new deficit spending. That's $11 trillion in Treasury securities that need to find buyers. If demand is weak, interest rates will spike. If interest rates spike, the interest payments on the existing $34 trillion in debt become unpayable. The Federal Reserve will be forced to step in and buy treasuries directly, essentially printing money to fund the government. This is called debt monetization, and it's the definition of a currency crisis. When the world sees the Federal Reserve printing trillions to buy treasuries that nobody else wants, confidence in the dollar will evaporate overnight. This is the moment when gold becomes the enemy. As the dollar collapses, gold will surge. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per ounce. This price signal will tell the world that the dollar is dying. The government cannot allow this message to spread. So they'll do what they did in 1933, criminalize the alternative. Here's something that hasn't gotten enough attention. The Federal Reserve has been running pilot programs for a central bank digital currency, CBDC, since 2022. They've stated publicly that they want a digital dollar operational by 2026 to 2027. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's on the Federal Reserve's own website. A CBDC gives the government unprecedented control over money. Every transaction is tracked. Every dollar can be programmed with expiration dates or spending restrictions. They can freeze your account instantly without a warrant. They can impose negative interest rates, forcing you to spend or watch your balance shrink. It's the ultimate tool for monetary control. But here's the problem. Nobody will voluntarily adopt a CBDC if they have alternatives. Why would you use programmable government money when you can use cash, cryptocurrency, or gold? This is why the implementation of a CBDC requires the elimination of alternatives. Cash will be phased out gradually through convenience narratives. Cryptocurrency will be regulated into submission or driven offshore. And gold will be confiscated. The timeline isn't random. The commercial real estate crisis peaks in 2026. The Treasury refinancing crisis hits in 2026. And the digital dollar rollout is scheduled for 2026 to 2027. This is the perfect storm. This is when they'll need emergency powers to restructure the monetary system. And gold confiscation will be sold as a necessary emergency measure to stabilize the economy and implement the new digital dollar system. Let me walk you through exactly how I believe this will unfold, based on the 1933 precedent and current conditions. I'm going to give you the step-by-step sequence so you can recognize it when it starts. Step 1. The triggering crisis, late 2025, early 2026. It will start with a major bank failure. Not Silicon Valley bank-sized. Bigger. Think Wells Fargo or U.S. Bank, a top 10 institution. The failure will be caused by commercial real estate losses and depositor flight. Within 48 hours, 3 or 4 other regional banks will fail. The FDIC will attempt emergency mergers, but there won't be enough healthy banks to absorb the failures. Over a weekend, because these things always happen over weekends, the government will announce a temporary banking holiday. All banks will close for 3 to 5 days to assess the situation and implement emergency measures. This will trigger mass panic. ATMs will run out of cash. Credit cards will stop working. The payment system will freeze. Step 2. The emergency declaration, week 1. The president will address the nation, declaring a national economic emergency under IEEPA. The speech will sound reasonable, calm, reassuring. We're taking decisive action to protect your deposits and stabilize the financial system. These measures are temporary and necessary. The emergency declaration will include several immediate provisions. Limits on cash withdrawals, $500 to $1,000 per day. Restrictions on wire transfers and large payment suspension of certain banking regulations to allow emergency mergers and buried in the fine print. Restrictions on precious metals transactions. Step 3. The gold registration period, Week 2. Within days of the banking holiday ending, the Treasury Department will announce a gold registration and stabilization program. They won't call it confiscation. They'll frame it as voluntary compliance with a national emergency measure. The announcement will require all individuals and businesses owning more than a threshold amount of gold, probably 5 to 10 ounces, to register their holdings with the IRS within 30 days. They'll claim this is necessary to prevent hoarding and market manipulation during the crisis. The registration will be enforced through existing reporting requirements. Dealers will be required to report all sales. Banks will be required to report all safe deposit box access. Anyone caught with unregistered gold after the deadline will face severe penalties. Step 4. The Forced Exchange Program, Month 2. Once registration is complete and they know who has gold and where it is, they'll announce the exchange program. All registered gold must be sold to the government within 60 days at a fair market price to be determined by the Treasury. They'll probably set the price at whatever gold was trading at before the crisis, maybe $2,800 to $3,000 per ounce. Payment will be made in digital dollars, not cash. This is crucial. It forces everyone into the new CBDC system. You turn in your gold, you get digital dollars that can be tracked, controlled, and programmed by the government. The penalty for non-compliance will be severe. Not just fines, but asset seizure, tax audits, and possible criminal charges. They'll make examples of a few high-profile cases to scare everyone else into compliance. Step 5. The revaluation, Month 6. Once the government has collected the majority of privately held gold, they'll do exactly what Roosevelt did in 1934. They'll announce that gold held by the Treasury is being revalued to its true market price of $5,000 or $6,000 per ounce. This instant revaluation will give the government trillions of dollars in paper wealth to recapitalize the banking system and fund the transition to the digital dollar. You will have been forced to sell your gold for $3,000. The government will then declare it's worth $6,000. That's a 100% wealth transfer. Your purchasing power will be cut in half, and the government will use that stolen wealth to fund their new monetary system. I know this sounds terrifying. It should. But paralysis is not a strategy. You have a window, probably 12 to 18 months, to position yourself before this unfolds. Here's exactly what you need to do. Step 1. Diversify your gold holdings internationally. Do not keep all your gold in the United States. If confiscation happens, it will be enforced through banking records, dealer reports, and safe deposit box searches. Gold held overseas is much harder to trace and seize. Consider opening a precious metal storage account in Switzerland, Singapore, or the Cayman Islands. These jurisdictions have strong property rights, strict banking secrecy, and a history of resisting foreign government seizure demands. Allocated storage means you own specific bars with serial numbers. They can't just hand your gold to someone else. Yes, this requires paperwork. Yes, you have to report foreign assets to the IRS on your FBAR forms. But reporting is different from confiscation. They can make you report it, but seizing gold in a Swiss vault requires cooperation from the Swiss government, which is much harder to obtain. Step 2. Hold physical gold in private storage, not bank safe deposit boxes. If you're keeping gold in a bank safe deposit box, you need to move it immediately. During the 1933 confiscation, the government had access to all bank records and could identify who had safe deposit boxes. Some banks were ordered to open boxes in the presence of Treasury agents to verify contents. Instead, invest in a high-quality home safe rated for precious metals. Bolt it to the floor in a location that's not obvious. Or use a private, non-bank vault service that doesn't report to the government. These private vaults are not regulated the same way banks are and don't have the same reporting requirements. Step 3. Buy gold jewelry and collectible coins. Here's something most people don't know. Executive Order 6102 included exemptions. Rare collectible coins were exempt. Jewelry was exempt. The government only confiscated bullion and common gold coins. Why? Because collectible and jewelry gold is harder to value and harder to melt down for monetary purposes. It's not as liquid or fungible as bullion bars. This created a loophole that many wealthy Americans exploited in 1933. You can do the same. Pre-1933 U.S. gold coins, certified rare coins, and gold jewelry are likely to be exempt from any future confiscation. Obviously, you'll pay a premium over spot price, but that premium is insurance against confiscation. A $2,000 St. Gaudens Double Eagle in high grade is both a store of value and potentially exempt from seizure. Step 4. Never buy gold from dealers that report to the government. When you buy gold from major dealers, certain transactions trigger reporting requirements. Currently, purchases over $10,000 in cash require a Form 8300 filing. Some dealers voluntarily report suspicious transactions even below this threshold. Buy from smaller, local dealers who value privacy. Pay with methods that don't create electronic trails, cash, money orders, cashier's checks. Break purchases into amounts below reporting thresholds. Yes, this is more work, but it keeps your gold holdings off government databases. If you already have gold purchases recorded, there's not much you can do about past transactions. But going forward, minimize your footprint. Step 5. Consider gold-backed cryptocurrencies as a hybrid strategy. This is controversial, but hear me out. Digital assets backed by physical gold, like Paxos Gold, PAXG, or Tether Gold, XAUT, offer an interesting middle ground. These tokens are backed 1:1 by physical gold stored in vaults, but they can be held in private cryptocurrency wallets that the government can't easily access. If gold confiscation happens, these tokens might fall into a regulatory gray area. They're not physical gold, so the confiscation order might not technically apply. They're not pure cryptocurrency, so they might avoid the harshest crypto regulations. It's a hedge against both scenarios. Obviously, this has risks. The tokens are only as good as the company backing them. If Paxos goes bankrupt or the government seizes their physical gold reserves, your tokens become worthless. But as part of a diversified strategy, it's worth considering. Step 6. Build alternative wealth stores that can't be confiscated. Gold is important, but it's not the only hard asset. Diversify into things the government can't seize or track easily. Silver. Less likely to be confiscated because it's an industrial metal, not primarily monetary. Harder to transport and store, which makes it less attractive for government seizure. Platinum and palladium. Industrial metals with monetary premium. Much less tracked than gold. Real estate. Land and property can't be moved or hidden, but they also can't be digitally seized. Hard assets with income generation. Collectibles. Art, vintage cars, rare books, wine, high-value items that don't show up on financial databases. Cryptocurrency. Bitcoin held in a hardware wallet that only you control. Not traceable if you're careful about how you buy it. The principle is simple. Diversify across assets that are hard to find, hard to value, or hard to seize. Step 7. Have an exit strategy. This is the most important and most uncomfortable step. You need to have a plan for leaving the country if things get really bad. I'm not saying move overseas right now. I'm saying have the option ready. Research second citizenship or residency programs. Countries like Portugal, Panama, and several Caribbean nations offer relatively straightforward paths to residency or citizenship through investment. This isn't about tax evasion. You'll still owe U.S. taxes as long as you're a citizen. This is about having a jurisdiction where you can store wealth and operate financially outside of U.S. government control. If the U.S. government implements capital controls, restrictions on moving money out of the country, you'll need to have assets already positioned offshore before the controls go into effect. Once they announce restrictions, it's too late. The window closes. Let me address the elephant in the room. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe none of this will happen. Maybe the government will magically solve its debt crisis without confiscation. Maybe the banking system will survive the commercial real estate collapse. Maybe the digital dollar will be voluntary and freedom-preserving. Maybe. If I'm wrong and you've followed this advice, what have you lost? You have some gold stored internationally. You paid a small premium for collectible coins instead of bullion. You have a home safe. You've diversified your wealth across multiple asset classes and jurisdictions. You're more private and more secure. That's not a bad outcome even if confiscation never happens. But if I'm right and you've done nothing, what have you lost? Everything. Your gold will be confiscated at below market rates. Your wealth will be converted to depreciating digital dollars. You'll be locked into a CBDC system with no escape hatch. You'll watch the government steal decades of your savings to fund their mismanagement. And you'll have no recourse because it will all be legal under emergency powers. The asymmetry is stark. The cost of preparing for something that doesn't happen is minimal. The cost of not preparing for something that does happen is catastrophic. Here's what I need you to understand. The reason most people won't take this seriously is exactly why it will work. That could never happen here. This is America. We have property rights. We have the Constitution. People said the exact same thing in 1933. The government can't just take our gold. That's theft. The Supreme Court will stop it. But it happened anyway. The Supreme Court upheld it. Property rights didn't matter. The Constitution didn't matter. Emergency powers trumped everything. The playbook exists. The precedent is set. The infrastructure is built. The crisis is coming. The only question is whether you'll recognize it before it's too late. April 5, 1933 happened because the government ran out of options. 2026 will happen for the same reason. The debt can't be paid. The dollar can't be saved. The system can't continue. Something has to give. And that something is your wealth. Don't let history repeat itself while you're holding the bag. If this opened your eyes to something you didn't see before, share it with someone you care about. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be tracking every development as we get closer to 2026. And leave a comment telling me, are you preparing? Or are you waiting to see what happens? The people who survived 1933 with their wealth intact were the ones who saw it coming and acted before the window closed. The window is still open, but it won't be for long. Stay informed. Stay ahead. And whatever you do, don't let them catch you holding nothing but paper when the music stops.